As we do meet the challenge of changing circumstances, a lot needs to be done. One of the people who is deep in that process and active in that process and taking a leadership role in that process is our next speaker. Michael Lyle is the Vice President of Planning, Law, and Aboriginal Relations for the IESO. He has been involved in the electricity sector for most of his career, formerly acting as Counsel for the Ontario Energy Board and for the Ministry of Energy. Michael's going to come up and provide us with some of his thoughts, and so I'd ask everyone to welcome Michael.
Thank you, Thomas, for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be part of your program today. In my remarks, I'm going to touch on a number of topics. I'll talk briefly about the changing role of the IESO in the context of our changing electricity sector. I'll also give an update on the load forecast and what this means for planning the power system. I will then discuss some of the challenges, as well as some of the opportunities that this represents for both the IESO and for the solar community. First, though, I'd like to start by congratulating all of you, the solar community in this room. Solar has come a long way in Ontario in a relatively short span of time, and that is due to a great extent to many of your efforts. Currently, there's approximately 140 megawatts of transmission-connected solar and nearly 1,700 megawatts of solar generation connected to our distribution systems. These numbers are expected to increase to 500 megawatts and 2,300 megawatts respectively by the end of 2017. And looking further ahead, we expect that by 2021, of the 10,700 megawatt target for non-hydro renewable generation, 3,800 megawatts of that will be solar. The growth of solar in Ontario is indicative of a rapidly changing electricity sector. As you know, the IESO itself has undergone some changes. Over the past year, we've had a strong focus on our own organization to ensure the merger of the two predecessor organizations realizes the intended benefits. This inward-looking effort also drove externally focused results. While there is still some integration work to be done, we can say with confidence that the merged organization is delivering greater public value both in our business and across the entire electricity sector. The activities of the new IESO now extend across Ontario's electricity sector. Because of this, we are better positioned to support change in the sector, improve our markets and how those markets and contracts work together, create efficiencies for the benefit of Ontarians, and of course promote more efficient use of electricity consistent with the growing culture of conservation in the province. The recently tabled Bill 135 represents yet another important change, one that further defines the changing role of the IESO. This legislation, if passed, would replace the current Integrated Power System Plan, or IPSP framework, and establish the Long-Term Energy Plan as the key planning document going forward. As part of this new framework, the IESO will play a key role as the independent planner responsible for the development of a technical report that will set the context for planning at the start of the LTEP development process. This document is to consider, and I quote, the adequacy and reliability of electricity resources with respect to anticipated electricity supply, capacity, storage, reliability, and demand. The IESO will also be responsible for an implementation plan post-LTEP and will in some circumstances have the authority to procure transmission. And there's more change on the horizon. On the climate change front, for example, we know that the province wants to achieve an 80% reduction in emissions over 1990 levels by 2050. To do that, the province is planning to work on a range of projects, from getting more electric cars on the roads to changing building codes to encouraging retrofits and create more environmentally friendly buildings. The steps being planned to get to these reductions won't be released by the government until the new year. We at the IESO will continue to stay tuned in to see what emerges here. Things like this, along with the changing role of the IESO in an evolving electricity sector, speak to a greater degree of interconnectedness and uncertainty than ever before. Looking back at the past half-century, Ontario's electricity consumption quadrupled from the 60s to the late 80s, but we're now back at the same level of demand for energy from the grid as we were in the late 80s. And since the recession in 2009, growth in grid demand has been offset by conservation savings and embedded generation. In fact, conservation has grown significantly to about 10 terawatt hours by 2014. Meanwhile, embedded generation has more than doubled from about 2 terawatt hours in 2008 to about 5 terawatt hours in 2014. What this means is that we can expect load to remain relatively flat for some time. So what does that mean for solar going forward? Is there an opportunity for growth? Well, yes, there is. With the potential for small-scale solar to reach grid parity in the next few years, net metering can become an easy and accessible way for customers to manage their bills and to contribute to the reliability of the grid. At the IESO, we're working with the ministry and industry partners to ensure that the program balances the value it provides to the system at a competitive cost. We're particularly interested in the possibility that net metered solar can be encouraged in regional plans where the system is constrained and capacity is required. Regional system planning ensures a reliable supply of electricity to regions. It considers conservation, generation, transmission and distribution, and innovative resources. And it is the link between provincial and local planning. The IESO is engaged in a robust regional planning process that encompasses 21 electricity planning regions across Ontario. Through this process, regional plans identify the needs and actions for the near, medium, and long terms for a 20-year planning horizon, and each region is required to be studied every 5 years. Working groups are established for each region composed of LDCs, the regional transmitter, and the IESO, and stakeholders, municipalities, and Aboriginal communities are engaged throughout the planning process. There are a number of approaches to meeting long-term needs. One approach that we discuss in regional planning is to deliver provincial resources. That is the traditional transmission and distribution planning approach. In other words, developing wires to supply the local area from system resources. In this approach, the transmitter and LDCs take a lead role in development. Another approach is where a centralized local supply resource may be developed, using possible technologies such as gas generation or CHP. A third approach is community self-sufficiency. Here, a variety of demand-side and distributed mechanisms would be considered to help manage local electricity needs and to avoid asset investments like station upgrades. Success with that approach depends on local communities taking the lead role. None of these approaches is mutually exclusive from the other in the development of a regional plan. A final plan may include elements from each of these approaches. Having said all this, planning for future needs in the current environment is challenging, to say the least. But with challenges, there are also often opportunities. For example, the agreement with respect to the refurbishments of the remaining 6 Bruce Power nuclear units was just announced last week. There may be the perception that, in light of this, and with flat demand growth, that there is little room for solar to grow. However, with the refurbishment, there are provisions in the contract for off-ramps. Off-ramps could occur before the 3rd unit is refurbished, and again before the 5th unit is refurbished, because we have a more economic alternative to meet Ontario's needs than the refurbishment of those units. Or, possibly, the refurbishments may not be needed at all, due to lower demand for electricity. The key challenges for solar in this scenario comes in combination with energy storage. As an intermittent resource, developing cost-effective storage technologies will be a factor in the future growth of solar. These technologies will need to be in the right position by the time that Bruce off-ramp decisions are being made in the next decade to provide an economic and reliable alternative. The IESO is currently actively engaged on the storage front through a 2-phase energy storage procurement process. In the first phase, the IESO selected storage technologies from 5 companies, totaling approximately 34 megawatts, that will offer ancillary services to support increased reliability and efficiency of the grid. The lessons learned from these projects will be used to understand how to better manage the day-to-day operation of the power grid using electricity storage. In Phase 2, 10-year contracts were offered to 5 companies for 9 separate energy storage projects totaling 16 megawatts. This second phase targeted energy storage technologies with a range of performance characteristics that can store energy when prices are lower and re-inject it at other times of the day when prices are higher and the energy has greater value. This will give the IESO a chance to see how these storage projects work on our Ontario grid and what they can do. With all of this, the government's pending climate change announcements, new technologies, a rapidly changing sector, as we look to plan in this context, timing is important. So too is flexibility and the ability to adapt quickly. For the planning work of the IESO, it means that we develop plans that can preserve flexibility by identifying key inflection points, by putting off procurements until absolutely necessary, and by giving consideration to short-term solutions. It also means that we need to be informed by the best intelligence available on emerging trends and technologies, how they will change the sector, and how this influences the type of resources required. We need a plan for a range of possible futures. We need to continue to work with our partners like Counsel to stay informed on all these developments as we navigate through this uncertainty. In closing, one thing we know for sure is that Ontario's electricity sector will continue to evolve. On the supply side, with evolving technology, with planning, and with the organizations that directly serve Ontario's electricity customers. And it's also certain that solar will continue to be a major renewable energy resource, carefully considered in the long-term planning of the province's electricity needs. Thank you.